The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast with Dotun Adebayo and Tim Vickery.
Yeah, welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast. Let me get all the protocol out of the way. Please do subscribe right under the button, as it were, on this thing, but also join us on our WhatsApp group. And remember, tomorrow we've got the Global Soccer Interactive where you can join in the conversation as well. But subscribe. Join the WhatsApp group, And that's by way of saying the Legendino is with us in Rio. And Tim, imagine the prodigal son returning to Anfield to play for Real Madrid in a Champions League game. You see, we've invited Dave Powell along to discuss that, but what do you think? Do you think that the fans are going to embrace him like the prodigal son he is, or will they reject him as the black sheep of the family is the question?
I think you've just quoted the lyrics from a song, from a famous son of Liverpool. Imagine all the Trent Alexander-Arnold. No, it could happen. I'm very, very happy today because I've just picked up this book in a Rio bookshop. It's called Love Me Do, The Beatles' Progress. And it's written by a US author who was based in England at the time, Michael Braun, 1964, this is written. So this is it's after they've conquered America. It's and Hard Day's Night's come out. But they're just on the cusp of reinventing popular music, and I think this is a fascinating document. He also goes around Liverpool. I've just been thumbing through it so far, but he goes around Liverpool, and it costs 4 and 6, whatever. You're the only one here who understands what 4 and 6.
22.5p, Dave Powell, to you youngsters. 22.5p.
That's about what I paid for it, I think. But I'm very, very. I think this is an interesting document, and I know with Dave, and thank you very much for joining us. Your main focus is the last few years of Liverpool.
Yes.
Maybe the last 15 years or so, the business of Liverpool. But just to start on, because this has always fascinated me. And at the time this book was written, 64, Liverpool is still kind of thriving. It's still, it was the port of the empire. And just flicking through it, you get that vibe from the author going around Liverpool. And there's 350 beat groups, as they were then called, in the wake of the Beatles and so on. And he's talking to people and why is this happening? And they're telling him, because it's one reason is because it's a port. And then the city goes into a rapid decline and really harsh decline as well. And yet the football club has all of these glory years. So you get a city which is in decline and shrinking, producing a football club which was, at the time, the main force in Europe. And that contradiction has always fascinated me, how the club was able to do this in a city that was going through such hard times.
Yeah, first off, I just want to try and, whenever I have an opportunity to talk about the Beatles, I have a very brief segue. So my late father was a drummer. Used to drum in the Cavern Club in Liverpool as one of the many things he did. He didn't really become a grown-up until his 40s, hence the reason why I had very old parents.
We're all there together, mate.
But he was drumming in the Cavern Club, so he was a session drummer, so he would sit there at a bar at all hours.
His name wasn't Pete Best, was it?
Sorry?
Your dad's name wasn't Pete Best.
No.
Yeah, he's called Dave Powell. Can we try and work that one out?
You don't know these days. Modern families. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Families. I've not taken the wife's name. So he used to sit at the bar, be a session drummer. Used to fill in whenever people needed to take a break, have a smoke, have a drink. And he played on stage with the Beatles many times when Ringo needed a break, and he bought his drum kit off him. Got pictures in my garage of him with the Beatles and Lennon and McCartney. So they are the ultimate keepsake for me, something I will pass down to my own children. But that is however, whenever I get the opportunity to share that, I always try and share it, because
it's a great dinner.
Some people, they have a life before their life, and you kind of don't see the kind of glory and how wonderful that was at the time. But then, as you get older, wow, that was an amazing thing for you to be a part of. So anyway, that's out of the way. So I became, when I took the job covering Liverpool football finance, kind of just before COVID times, really. But I was covering local football for then my team Chester, hence the shirt there. I became really, I had a desire to kind of learn more about the city itself, culturally, socially. So I found, like the Boys from the Black Stuff a really, really important watch to kind of really colour my judgment, I suppose, in terms of what went on during that period. And quite often, football clubs become the only beacons of hope for some areas of the country. Maybe less so in the modern era, certainly in the English game. Maybe that's because of the globalization of the sport. Maybe that's changed. But certainly back then, when industry starts falling, people still rally behind their football clubs, and the support doesn't waver. And I always think even the investment thesis now to people coming into football still remains the same. One of the last thing people will drop when it comes to when there's a cost of living crisis, and that can be applicable to now, or it can be applicable to 30, 40 years ago, is watching their football club, because it's often the only thing which brings them kind of unbridled joy. Yes, you have the risk of complete misery, and I'm as a Chester fan, I'm well aware of that. So, but I think that kind of maintained, and football remained affordable through that difficult time then. More challenging now. The whole kind of landscape has changed completely. But I think Liverpool Football Club was a beacon of hope for a city, especially when people are out of work and joblessness was rife. Unemployment numbers were hugely, were enormous. And the football club sometimes the only positive relationship that people had in their own city. And I think, Boys from the Black Stuff, I mentioned again, it doesn't really, the football club isn't really a theme of it. You can sense why that would be the case, because it's such a bleak picture which is painted, So, and I think that kind of followed its way from the 60s through to the 70s and then ultimately the 80s when that happened, into the present.
You've slightly answered my point there.
Sorry. You're very quick.
No, you haven't answered Tim's point. No, never mind that. We've moved on from that. But you've slightly answered the point I was going to make, which is that it's not necessarily a contradiction in terms. From your time at the Liverpool Echo, covering both Liverpool football and Liverpool itself, and you kind of hinted at it, you will know that there is a strand of culture that runs like a seam through the city of Liverpool and the people of Liverpool, who consider themselves, a certain breed, whether you call it Scousers or not. So even when the city is in decline, and Tim's not wrong there, because I went to Liverpool the first time, it would have been in the early or late 1980s. I might have been there once or twice as either for football or for music before, but I can't remember that so clearly. But I remember spending some time there about 1992, it would have been. And the person I knew from Liverpool telling me, 50% of the city has moved out since the 1950s. And there are all these huge empty houses. I mean, it was just remarkable. You could rent, somebody I knew rented, and it was a huge flat right across the road from the cathedral, and you rented it for about 50 quid a week, which was just remarkable. In London at the time, it would have been maybe 200, 300 quid a week. Anyway, but even though I was living in a friend's house, huge house next door to an empty house, abandoned huge house, which was next door to another abandoned huge empty house, and so on. Even so, and it looked a bit desolate, there was this humour about Scousers that was just greater than the economic downturn of the area. So, for example, I remember this very clearly. Got into a taxi to take us into town, and it was like an old, very iconic English black taxi. In the old days, they used to have the front passenger seat. What would be the front passenger seat was like empty, where you could put your luggage, so there wasn't a seat there or anything like that. And the guy's driving along, and he's having a conversation with somebody. I'm like, what's going on? And basically, he's on his date night. And guess where his girlfriend's sitting that we can't see, where the luggage should be. And they're having a date night as they're driving us up and down. I'm like, this could only happen in Liverpool. There's something about Liverpool that did not seem extraordinary at all. And I think that seeps through the music at the time. Its unique position as a dock was obviously important to the music coming over from the States in the days before, your generation, Spotify and everything, but also the fact that Liverpool was willing to absorb that and turn it into something, what's coming over. I think it's there in the football as well. I think, like you say, the football team is like a beacon, but it's got to have the receptacle, which is this sort of very genuine and very almost tangible cultural stream that you feel when you're in Liverpool.
In financial terms, I know the club at the time would say that the secret was European competition every year. That they said that's how they rebuilt the stadium, because that was the extra. It was the extra money coming in above and beyond the league program. Was from the mid '60s they start playing European competitions every year, and that gets the money in, keeps them afloat, and keeps the success going. But come your era, when you arrive on the scene, that's a given, isn't it? The money from European competitions is kind of a given. So what's the extra now? How have Liverpool in your time been able to compete?
Well, it's that European exposure they had even in the 60s, 70s kind of planted the seed in so many other countries where you get access to live broadcasted European games. It planted the seed of English football within a lot of football fans globally. Certainly consumed it as a big kind of supporter base, Sweden, etc. But that kind of globalization has kind of been amplified, certainly in the Fenway Sports Group era, which is October 2010 onwards. I always, whenever I do lecturing quite often, I always try and tell people or the students that to now think of the Premier League as a product, almost like the WWE, the wrestling. It has to have broad appeal, has to have a storyline, a narrative, and has to have reach and touch points of all parts of the globe. And you have to appeal to, you're no longer just appealing to match-going fans. You are appealing to how do you make the most of the opportunities that exist for fans that can't get to games. Some people have never been to Liverpool, but yet it means as much to them as they would say anyone else. I suppose the advancement of technology and the digital age means that you can do more. You can reach fans in a whole manner of ways. I mean, recently the kind of, I don't know if you've seen the LA the Sphere, whereby you can go and they've got stands within the Sphere in LA. I think it's LA, or is it Vegas? One of the two, and you can watch the game on this kind of convex screen, which makes it appear like you're watching it in person. So there's all different ways of reaching these fans. But what Liverpool did right was be a good team with an interesting story and narrative at the right time. Because Manchester United built up this huge financial base from being the first club really to expand into kind of global, a global footprint. And that they did that by leveraging the success they had throughout the Alex Ferguson years into the 2000s, early 2010s. And then the Premier League in the 2010s became a little dull. Not in terms of, there's some great teams, etc., but in terms of someone charismatic that people, that was interesting, because we'd seen the Mourinho era kind of come and go, and we always had all that at the same time. We had Ferguson and Wenger, the whole rivalry. We had Mourinho, new kid on the block, and really a real disruptor and so charismatic. And I think Jurgen Klopp was really, really key to accelerating Liverpool, the interest in Liverpool globally, because he played a certain brand of football. He was really engaging, really authentic as well. And I think the whole thing chimed well with Liverpool as a football club, as a people, as a community and demographic, because I think when someone genuinely understands what they represent and where they are and who they're actually doing this for, I think he fully bought into that. And as a narrative and a story, that really moved Liverpool on to the point where once they started winning and the money that comes with that, European football becomes, a staple. You're able to leverage success to a far greater extent because you are already, in the eyes and ears of people all around the world.
But isn't that fascinating? Because in your analysis of why Klopp was so successful, you went straight to the idea of the essence, the idea of who he's representing, right at the core. So you've got this potential contradiction between the essence and the periphery. The heart and the soul there around Liverpool, and this global audience. I got a mate who's a Liverpool fan, and he told me that during the Klopp era, he just became a 9-year-old again. It made him a 9-year-old again. But obviously, the context is very, very different. We had a chat a couple of weeks ago. Fabulous Liverpool football writer, Tony Evans. My God, some of his stuff is good. He wrote a piece about being there at Heysel, and it is one of the finest pieces of football writing I have ever read. It's magnificent. He said, it's really fascinating, this, I think, that a few years ago, someone in the Liverpool hierarchy said to him, Tony, you got to stop thinking about Liverpool being a football club, and you got to start thinking about Liverpool being a creator of content. Where do you stand on this? Because he doesn't want to think about it being a creator. He wants to think about it being a football club. And me, with my grey hair, I'm inclined to agree with him. Where do you stand on these?
I'm inclined to agree, and I also don't think, I think there is a difference. I think some things Liverpool can't do, which other football clubs can do, and that means they have to leave some money on the table sometimes, because there is still very much a kind of social responsibility to what is right and wrong, and what a football club should be doing, not what a global media enterprise, entertainment business should be doing, what a football club should be doing. So that's why the Super League was so impactful. I think Liverpool have probably gone and done more than most in the wake of that. I mean, that was a horrific decision, whichever way you slice it. But from a business point of view, I understood the rationale, because you can't be on the outside looking in at a time, because that would have been destructive for the business. However, from a football club's point of view, it just wasn't the done thing. But then they engaged the supporters clubs, and now it's kind of written in the articles of association, whereby any decisions like that has to have approval from the supporters, etc. But like Liverpool creates great content. It does, because it's an interesting football club, has a great narrative, great story, kind of rich history and past. But I think they do that, and it's a weird way. They what is successful for them is that they have to try and make it organic and look like it is done from a different point. So for an actual football club, so I look at the list of kind of commercial partners that Liverpool have. They don't have much churn when it comes to that. So Carlsberg have been a partner of Liverpool's for 30 years. Standard Chartered, by the time this deal runs, it would have been almost more than 17 years. People, and they keep on coming back and paying more money, because the actual impact, and they call them sponsorship activations, to use the corporate jargon, they're actually meaningful for them when these are done, because it seems quite authentic. And if you ever, I don't tend to watch too much of kind of club produced commercial content because it's very dry. But the Liverpool ones are always really, really, really well done, and everything seems to be, have the thread back to the fact that they represent the city of Liverpool and its people and its fans before anything else. And that, I spend quite a bit of time in America over the past few years, and in fact, week after next, I'm doing a live show for the NY supporters clubs, Liverpool supporters clubs in Manhattan. They think the same as Liverpool fans. It's kind of it's an understanding that yes, they're supporting a global football club, but it's not kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard and seeing where it lands. It's chosen because it chimes with beliefs, whether that's New York and Liverpool have similarities as well. I remember Woody Johnson, who's the owner of the New York Jets, saying when he was he ambassador to the UK for a period, he said that Liverpool is like Europe's New York, and I didn't mean that in terms of big buildings, etc., but in terms of how its community has been brought together from all parts of the world. It's very welcoming. It's culturally diverse, from religion to race, everything. But I think that has similarities, and I think that really chimes with people. So I think that it's been a case of they've stayed close to their roots, and I don't like, some clubs are able to become content machines and turn out this stuff, and just Manchester City have been a winning machine. I still don't understand what the identity of Manchester City is beyond Pep Guardiola, and once he goes, I don't get it still. Liverpool haven't had to trade on any of that, and they've been less successful during that period. It shows that there is something valuable in being authentic.
What is the Liverpool narrative and story then? Is it just I say just, but nevertheless, is it simply that it's a port that welcomes people from all over the world? Is it a staging post for the Beatles? Is there something more intrinsic to Liverpool? Because the one thing that we haven't mentioned is that Liverpool has this incredible support. It doesn't matter which division Liverpool are in or who they're playing, you will always fill out the Liverpool allocation of tickets. I know that for a fact from my mate who's a scalper, and said, look, the one thing you can be sure of, and that's why all the scalpers descend on Liverpool games, because in the old days, things have changed a little bit, obviously, because the club's got a little bit wiser to it, and the cops are coming down hard on them, and the game ain't what it used to be. But once upon a time, you could always rely on Liverpool fans to follow their teams. I've been on a early Sunday morning train to London, and I think, I can't remember where it was all the Liverpool fans got on, but the whole train was packed with Liverpool fans, and there was no seating area. Half of them were standing up. I couldn't get a seat, but there wasn't a word of complaint. There wasn't a word, there wasn't a peep of complaint. People, for the most part, stood silently all the way to London. They will follow their team everywhere. And I wonder what that's about, if you like. What's the narrative or the story that gets them following to that extent?
I think it's one of the things that Liverpool, yes, it's an English city. It's one of England's most populous cities, but from things which have happened historically, whether it's the 80s and kind of the huge unemployment and feeling completely forgotten about by central government, or whether it's you look at Hillsborough and how that played out in the national media via the Sun, etc. I think for a period it felt like Liverpool almost they kind of annexed themselves from England. I mean, there is a phrase in among some Scousers, kind of Scouse not English, so. And there is a kind of a fairly large cohort, I suppose, that still doesn't really identify with the England national team. So there is an element of this. It's kind of it's a representation of it's identity. So the reason, and I always look at identity as being the biggest reason why anyone does anything with sport, and it's where you get the most. It hurts the most, but also, I support Chester because my father supported Chester. I'm from Chester. Everything to do with it, I am a born and bred Cestrian, which gives me identity. So I don't care whether they win or lose. I care that I am part of, it is my identity. And I think Liverpool has that sense of identity to a greater extent because of it's demographics. And obviously, Everton fans similar again, so they're very much wedded to the cause of the football clubs. But they, I think maybe there's a few, you could think of some other examples throughout the UK where that's similar, Newcastle maybe, but I think it's not the same for all football clubs. And I think if you look at the London clubs, it's a bit different as well because, your identity, you're not you may well be a Londoner, but the sense of identity per club is very different because, these are small areas, Arsenal and Spurs, etc. But I think Liverpool is a city, a beating heart, and so that has kind of gives people that sense of identity. And I think they carry that with them when they go, whether it's away games in Europe, etc. I think they see it as they are still flying the flag for Liverpool in the same way that they would have done decades previous, but they still carry the, I don't say emotional baggage, but certainly a sense of what's gone before because family ties in Liverpool are very, very strong. So it tends to be the case that following, whether it's red or blue, follows down through the generations, and that kind of people understand the narrative and what's gone before at a very early age. There isn't a place in Liverpool. There isn't a 10-year-old in Liverpool that wouldn't know the reason why they don't sell the Sun in anywhere in Merseyside. It's just that's because it is very much a sense of identity and belonging. I think that it challenges to what I've been saying previously. It's that is been core to Liverpool's success. Now everyone doesn't see it as people jump on it and think but that's what rival football fandom does. People don't like the fact they have their own song, You Never Walk Alone, and this, that, and the other. But I think for some clubs and some fan bases, I think they would like to have had more kind of like closer identity with their own football club.
Yeah, you've certainly got the song. Flipping out. That doesn't harm, does it? If you're a Liverpool supporter, there'll be a moment where there will be that communal gathering of the congregation of which you are part of, and I can see how that glues you firmly with everybody else in the stadium and those people on the pitch for whom it means so much as well. Going back to the topic that Tim introduced, and for which you are here, let me remind people as well that our guest this time around on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast is Dave Powell. For many years, a football writer for the Liverpool Echo. Now you've gone out on your own. You've set up your own Substack platform as well, where you're talking about the finances of Liverpool. And the obvious question, as I said, referring back to Tim's point about the money, the obvious question is, where did the money come from to buy Alexander Isak for gazillions this summer and then not play him after all?
Bitcoin.
Really?
No, can you imagine?
well, everybody's on Bitcoin nowadays, apart from me,
John Henry bought 1,000 Bitcoin back in 2009, and it's basically so one of the biggest arguments around against Fenway Sports Group for a long period of time has been they are tight-fisted. They don't spend money in the market in the same way that everyone else does, which always probably rankles with me a little bit because it should be judged on what you get for your money and how you spend your money as opposed to how much money you spend. So they have sat out a number of transfer windows. There have been occasions definitely where they should have done more post-success to kind of really solidify that position. and they suffered competitively as a result of that. But this past summer, it's worth thinking about the previous year they'd been in the Europa League, and that from a financial perspective, that can be impactful to a club, negative 75, 80 million to Liverpool in Liverpool's case. That's a big shortfall to make up. So last summer we saw not much activity. We're talking about summer of 24. I think they signed Federico Chiesa for 10.5 million, and they signed the Georgian keeper Mamardashvili, which they actually put on the books for this summer because he went on loan to. It was an agreement that he would stay at Valencia for one more year. So they didn't really spend anything. So they've kept their powder dry for this summer, but they also had a lot of saleable assets which they probably didn't have in some previous windows. So players who have come through the youth system, they don't carry what's known as book value, which is where when a player is signed for a football club, regardless of how the money changes hands in terms of tangible cash, what happens is the guaranteed transfer fee is spread over the number of years in the contract, which is capped at 5 years. That's throughout a process known as amortization. So, and that is what it accounts for in the book. So with every year that decline, every year of a contract which is played through, that amortization cost decreases by a year. So if it's a 5-year contract, you've signed someone for 50 million, it's 10 million a year. So after 3 years, they have 20 million left of their book value, etc. So, but if you're an academy product, you have none of that. So you can be sold for complete profit in a summer. So this past summer, they've sold. Tyler Morton went to Lyon for a significant fee. Harvey Elliott went on loan to Villa, isn't he? So, and kind of, but he'll be, there's a chance he could leave for a permanent fee next summer. Trent Alexander-Arnold left the club. Yes, they missed out on a big payday for him because he played out his contract, but significant wages off the wage bill, and they got a small fee of, I think it was 10 million, so he could play in the Club World Cup quite early. And they also sold players who'd been at the club for quite a while, who didn't have much book value, and they sold them for a great price. So Luis Diaz, they bought for 40-something million, and they ended up selling him for close on 60, and that's after 4 years of service. So made a lot of profit on player sales, which means they could go into the market and spend 450 million because they're not committing 450 million in one summer. What they're doing is it's on a piecemeal basis over time. So those deals will be amortized like everything else. So as long as you can meet the cost of that moving forward, which they will through broadcast rights increase, commercial rights increase, commercial fees increase, match day revenue is increasing, and they are back in the Champions League for last season and this season. And it looks like, barring, I know they've had a wobble recently, but still can't envisage them not making the Champions League. I think this summer was about, they had to spend big at some stage because Mohamed Salah will leave. He's getting older, and his useful life as an elite football player will eventually come to, it'll pass. Same for Virgil van Dijk. So you can't do all that at once, but you need to. I think they probably signed too many players, if anything, and kind of the cohesion hasn't been great. But they needed to spend big in order to make sure that they're part of the Champions League conversation, regardless of what happens else. Fourth place minimum is what they have to do, and I think they realise after the wobble of missing out on the Europa League a couple of years back that they need depth and quality. And this is kind of a transfer window for them to spend for the next 5 years. They're looking ahead for the next 5 years for it. I wouldn't expect next summer to look anything like this one.
I remember being a kid, being an adolescent, and I'd saved up my paper round money, and I got enough. I'm about 14, 15, got enough to go up to Carnaby Street and buy something for myself. And what did I do? I bought this grotesque, horrible, what on earth was I thinking of? Green and blue striped boating blazer. I feel like wearing sunglasses now just describing it. What had I done? I'd made the obvious novice mistake. I bought the flashiest thing in the shop. It's useless. I didn't have anything to wear it with. It was absolutely useless. Do you think that in this window, Liverpool have been a little bit like the adolescent version of yourself, and they've spent money like people who are not accustomed to spending money?
I think no. I mean, Wirtz, I think, will prove himself to be the player that everyone has seen in Germany. I do. The thing I still can't really get my head around the Ekitike and Isak signings in the same window, because Newcastle made a move for Ekitike very early on in the window, and Liverpool immediately showed their hand with it, and they got him. And I thought, oh, that takes him out the race for Isak. Then Isak must be staying put. But then they kind of went for Isak, and Ekitike to me looks like he could play that Isak role quite comfortably anyway. So I don't know whether, but again, I'm not a sporting director. I am. They will have the depth of analysis and everything. So Liverpool don't sign players on a whim. That's hence the reason why, when I think autonomy for the manager, for managers in general, seems to have waned over the years. A lot of these are kind of transfers by committee, aren't they? But they would have to fit a certain set of what they need.
What about a centre back? Surely what they most needed was a centre back.
That was I'm never a fan of doing things late in the window. People do that
exactly.
Kicking the can down the road.
Surely that's amateur hour. Surely, you get your priorities in first, or no?
Because you have to understand that these clubs, you are not the only thing that matters in the football ecosystem. These clubs have to have a replacement, because if Crystal Palace let Gahey go, they wouldn't have had time to bring in a replacement anywhere near as adequate. And they want European qualification themselves. They're in Europe this year. They've got their own goals and dreams. They're not there to service Liverpool Football Club. So I think that, regardless of whichever way they cut it, is probably a misstep from recruitment. Definitely, they signed a young lad, Leone, from Parma. He's had he's done his ACL, which is a real shame. But they needed a ready to go, oven baked class centre back to come straight in and take away some of the responsibility from Van Dijk, who is still great, but he's getting older, and Konate, who some games looks great, some games look like his head's already in a Real Madrid shirt. So I think that was just a lack of foresight, really, and maybe thinking they could, call the shots entirely. And I think, if anything, it was probably a good thing for the Premier League as a whole. I know everyone had a lot to say about Oliver Glasner and holding Mark Gahey hostage and this, that, and the other. But from objectively, we're looking at thinking, why would I? I'm not going to get much money for him, but he's more valuable to me for this season than he would be getting £30 million for him. Very, very, he's cut price anyway. Because he's a if he had a 5-year contract, he'd be a £95-100 million centre back. Such is the market, but there's no onus on Oliver Glasner to do anyone a favour. So I think that was a mistake on Liverpool's part, because that was the most glaring thing they needed, I think, was depth at centre-back.
Talking about the importance of Liverpool as a port, as I'm sure, Dave, you're aware, there is a Liverpool in Uruguay. They play bizarrely in blue and black stripes, but they're Liverpool, because ships were coming over from Liverpool. So you get Liverpool in Uruguay. Now, Uruguayan football was first out the blocks in South America. They're the first winners of the Copa America. They invented the World Cup. They're the first winners of the World Cup. And if you take things back 40 years or so, 40 Uruguayan clubs can compete with anyone in the world. Why? Because 60,000 people in the Centenario Stadium in Montevideo is pretty much the same as 60,000 people in a stadium in Europe. And then, of course, the big differential is TV. When it becomes a show for TV, the European clubs work this out quicker than anyone else, and they come up with a show which you broadcast to the world. And so your market is no longer just the 60,000 people or whatever in the stadium. Your market is global, based on these billions and billions watching TV all around the world. Now, one thing in today's media landscape that people like me just cannot understand is how it works, because it keeps changing. It's changing. YouTube. What is this YouTube of which you speak? And so many changes. Does this mean that the TV broadcasting money on which the whole edifice is constructed, is this vulnerable?
Yes. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see that play out. There is, over the past few years, the bigger clubs have been able to wean themselves off a reliance on broadcast income in terms of a ratio of what the percentage of income that comes in from broadcast money. That's because they're able to command bigger match day revenues, and commercial rights are far, far bigger. For the likes of Brentford, Bournemouth, etc., the broadcast rights are still their absolute bread and butter. Now, the current Premier League deal is on a 4-year cycle this time around, not a 3-year cycle domestically. And combined international domestic rights are about 12 billion over this course of this cycle. I think there comes a point where people illegally stream Premier League games in greater numbers than at any time previously. That's because the cost of living has gone up, and people still want to watch football, but they're faced with paying 75, 80, up to £100 sometimes if they want to watch their team across a number of. And it's not just Sky anymore. You've got Sky, TNT, a lot of over-the-top services. Amazon Prime dipped in for a while. That is a problem for the domestic rights. So, because it comes a point where if you haven't got the subscribers to keep on meeting the demand for more and more money after every single cycle, what happens is they'll offer less money, and they'll all offer less money across the board. The Premier League did well to keep the same deal during COVID, because that was where they thought the whole model was going to be tested. Do people still, is there still value in it? Turned out there was, but I think domestically, the next 10 years might see a diminution in the value of rights. Internationally, it's still going to climb, and that might even things out slightly over that period. But longer term, I think there's a real question about how. There's a reason they talk about Premflix and things like that, and taking the Premier League's own content in-house, where the clubs have more ownership over it. They have a greater slice of the pie, etc. Because traditional broadcast and satellite, etc., will be played out over eventually, because it just will. I can't. I haven't had a Sky subscription for a long while. If there's a good game, I'll go to the pub. But streaming will become more and more prominent. You only have to look at. Mark Goldbridge and his Manchester United fan channel acquired the highlights package for the Bundesliga a couple of months ago, and that should be instructive as to where we are heading with a lot of this. It will be. It's hard to know the answer, and I think a lot of the broadcasters, don't know the answer. We look at what happened with the Club World Cup. Now, there was not an awful lot of interest initially at the price that FIFA wanted. Eventually, DAZN came in, but DAZN adore losing money. It's their favourite thing. So eventually, I'm sure they're convinced it's going to pay off. But it's such a heavily loss-making broadcast business. Offered $1 billion for the rights for that tournament. Will they see the benefit of it? Maybe down the line. But I'm concerned for clubs that have a heavy reliance on broadcast for the longer term, that they may get caught out in the cold, because things don't go up forever. It's anti-Darwinian to think that that happens. But I think that clubs are now starting to pivot towards finding other ways to make up the shortfall that they probably predict is going to arrive in the next decade.
And that's bad news for ticket prices, isn't it?
Yes, and that's everything has to have a cost. It's and that's just. Ticket prices at the moment. When the broadcast money came in spade loads, there was a huge argument for 20's plenty, and that was it's hard not to make that argument. But when the clubs now are going to come back in a few years' time and say, actually, broadcast rights are down, so you have to pay more for a ticket. But so long as the demand is there, which there always will be for Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal, etc. What is going to happen is the Premier League clubs on the periphery who haven't got much chance of growing their brand internationally, aren't able to get into European football and kind of exist in that little gap, the Fulhams, etc. That's when ticket prices start to soar because wage costs aren't coming down anytime soon. And I just feel like we're in a little bit of a bubble. And it's been predicted this Premier League bubble has for a long time. I remember Claire Enders, who runs kind of an analysis firm, said this 2015. Everyone was like, "You're talking nonsense. This is the best product that's ever existed, and will always, there'll always be a demand for it." Yes, I think there will, but it won't be a demand in the same way because we're not going to consume content in the same way we do in 20 years' time. So it's about who is making, what the Premier League looks like in 20 years' time will be vastly different. I think we'll have less teams. I think the English football pyramid will have regionalised leagues. I'm not excited about anything that's coming. If that, in the longer term, so that's quite a bit of a dooms merchant, but I'm just not, because I'm still bound by tradition and thinking that's something really, really meaningful and important to me. It's part of why I enjoy going to the football at Division 6. I'm really, really concerned about how we hold on to the kind of the thread of the game from a traditional sense, which is so important in this country. Is every country, but this country in particular. I'm really, really conscious that I think Sky money when it arrived in 1992 and the way the Premier League changed to become kind of 20 elite teams, that's allowed the Premier League to create this gap between La Liga, Serie A. In the 90s, Serie A was the place to watch football. I would get up and watch Gazzetta Football Italia, and I'd know all the players from Cremonese or Cagliari or Foggia. But now there is the revenue differential between kind of even the Bundesliga as well and the Premier League is huge, which is why La Liga and Serie A are pushing to host games abroad because they need to make revenue elsewhere. I'm just not excited for what happens when the music stops. I mean, it's one of my favourite films is Margin Call with Jeremy Irons.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Love it.
And it's there's that scene in the boardroom when it's kind of what do we do when the music stops? He goes, the music at the moment is slowing. If it were to stop, and then we have kind of the huge cliff edge to drop off. That's my concern longer term, which is why there's such a push for globalization of the Premier League to position itself as a global league, like the NFL and the NBA already does, because they're the only ones that exist. Premier League wants to be a global league, a global league which operates in England.
I know we've got time for a couple of jokes. We're running out of time, but yeah, a couple of jokes. Because I've got one that I've been waiting to drop ever since Tim mentioned Uruguay and so on. And then you talked about, the television future, or at least the way that they manage football now, as being somewhat anti-Darwinian. So I was going to just mention that, well, Nunes wasn't exactly an evolution, was it? Boom, boom. And then what else was I going to tell you?
Has Darwin Núñez going to Saudi Arabia been an evolution? How does that see? I can take your weak jokes and make them into serious points. Look at that.
Over to you, Maestro.
How do you see the appearance of Saudi football? What's its effect on the Premier League? Is it wonderful because it means there's a place they can offload players that they don't want anymore, or is it a threat?
Well, Jordan Henderson went there, didn't he?
Yeah.
From Liverpool.
I think it's going to become more and more important for the Premier League because, for that reason you mentioned there, Tim, about a long time ago, it seems a long time ago, the best players in the Premier League, if they weren't getting game time in the Premier League teams, would go to AC Milan. They'd go to Inter Milan. They go Internazionale. I got my wrist slapped for saying it. There's no such team as Inter Milan apparently, which is correct. Internazionale. Or they would go to Bayern Munich, or they go to Dortmund, or Valencia. Hosts of major European teams that have won huge prizes. Now those teams, save for Real Madrid in Spain, they are the only ones who are taking players from anyone. who don't want you, who could go into the market and say, well, we'll have him. Paris Saint-Germain tried it, and they've had more success when they actually pulled back from that model of just spending for spending's sake. There is no longer a market which is why clubs are having to offload players on loan for cut price deals and still having to pay a portion of their wages. So you look at a number of players who, Marcus Rashford couldn't find a home permanently anywhere for the past couple of years. So he's on loan at Barcelona while United pick up some of the slack. And that's happened with Jadon Sancho, etc. So there isn't a market. Saudi Arabia offers the Premier League a chance to recoup good money for players who have underperformed and who are still on big wages. The problem was when you are the biggest fish, you have the wage bills have ballooned to a point where, yes, Premier League clubs can afford them, but nobody else in European football would offer that kind of money. But the players want that kind of money still. And if you're not going to offer that money elsewhere, guess what? I'll just kick it round in the reserves. I know who Winston Bogart is. I'll just sit out for the next 4 years of my contract. So, but that's the problem. So the Saudi Pro League has kind of presented a little bit of a solution. I mean, there's probably going to be an element even at the end of this coming season where Saudi are probably thinking if we can, they pay money to take Mohamed Salah, etc. I think that, but eventually that will stop because the Saudi Pro League has realised they don't really want to be a retirement home for Premier League players who are kind of 33 plus. It should be. They're starting to make moves for younger talent because they want that to be, to be the way it goes. When you look at French football, Lyon, they're signing, they're not able to participate. Marseille, they're not able to participate in signing top level talent. So I worry that the market is so thin for clubs to take players off the Premier League that you're just going to be left with this huge surplus of players and bloated squads, huge wage bills, but you still have to pay for these things, and that involves expecting commercial revenues to rise, and that puts pressure on everything because, I just worry the whole ecosystem is a really kind of dangerous point whereby the Premier League has been great for the Premier League the Premier League has been great in terms of money for the 2010s into the 2020s, but now it's faced with being almost too big.
On a serious note, though, and this is my final point, so I don't know if you want to come in again, Tim, but on a serious note...
I will if I can make sense out of it. I will. But if it makes sense on its own, I'll just leave it be,
On a serious note, what does Arne Slot have to achieve with the team this season, realistically, for Fenway to look and say, well, we spent a lot of money in the summer, but at the end of the day, it was justified and we might even recoup post this season? At what level does, because they don't look like they're going to retain, as we speak, they're going to retain the Premier League title, and who knows, that might free them up in the Champions League or whatever. What is the least he has to achieve, do you think?
Nothing to add, Your Honour. Nothing to add.
For now.
The minimum requirement is a top four finish, but they have to be title challengers. I don't think you can't win every year. The league is too competitive to simply win every year because, yes, Manchester City did, they did really well during that period, but you could argue that was during a period where some of the biggest rivals that you normally would have had either fell off, United weren't there, and other clubs were going through too much churn. Chelsea, hit and miss. Liverpool couldn't really sustain that momentum. They did towards kind of from the title win through, I suppose. But I think he has to prove that they are kind of bona fide challenges every year now. I mean, they've done the rebuild, and they've done the getting there. They've done building a sustainable football club, etc. They've built revenues to a point where they can spend. They have to be in the mix every single year, and it's going to be that adds the pressure cooker for whoever comes in as a manager now. But I think Slot will be afforded the time to make this group of players work. I still don't believe they just, like I say, it was a scattergun approach. I think they misguided in not getting a defender first, but I think they've tried to piece together a team that can win silverware. Because Fenway Sports Group want Liverpool to win everything, like any ownership group does, because that is the best thing for creating value when they eventually leave the football club and for getting bigger commercial deals, everything. Winning breeds greater financial returns. So, but I think Champions League and just making sure that they aren't seen to have fallen off considerably this season. I still don't think it'll be I don't think Arsenal win at a canter. I think Arsenal will win the title, but I don't think they'll win at a canter. I think there's a lot more bumps in the road to come for it. But I think Slot, if he can get, if he's managed to kind of navigate this past few weeks and comes out winning and challenging again, he's probably might serve him better in the future, because Liverpool don't do managerial churn. Stability is part of their kind of core DNA under FSG, so I imagine that's going to continue. But requirement of Champions League football is non-negotiable.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. You know your stuff. Just remind people, definitely. We've been talking to Dave Powell today on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, formerly of the Liverpool Echo, now has recently set up his own Substack. And there are two Substack addresses I can give you. The business of lfc.substack.com and the bottom line sport.substack.com.
If you could use the former one, that'd be
okay.
Great.
Well, scrap what I just said and listen to what Dave says, and sometimes listen to what Tim says as well. He's going to be back tomorrow with me as well on the Global Sport Initiative, so you'll have a lot more time. And don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to join our WhatsApp page, and don't forget to reconvene tomorrow at 4 p.m. Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us BrazilianShirtNamePod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name podcast is an 1129 production.